everybody, welcome back to the Fluffy Curvy Princess. I'm Sarah, and today we're going to be going over more of the works of Jack Hyles. Now, for those of you who don't know, Jack Hyles was an independent fundamental Baptist preacher and was a very important figure within the movement. I did a video on him a few weeks ago about how he viewed woman, which he expressed in his work, Woman the Completer, which was a compilation of some of the sermons he preached over the years. If you'd like to see it, I am linking it in the description below. In that video, I do talk a little bit about the history of Jack Hyles, but I want to clarify a few more things here today. For those of you who may be questioning the amount of influence he actually had over the IFBC, or Independent Fundamental Baptist Church, I wanted to read you some statistics that are actually from his book, How to Rear Teenagers. Don't just take my word for it. This church has a membership of over 100,000 and has averaged for the last 3 years 10,000 baptisms. For many years, the church has been acclaimed to have the world's largest Sunday school. During Dr. Hyles' ministry, First Baptist Church has increased in property valuation to over $55 million. His book also mentions that he has 48 published materials between books and pamphlets, which have reached over 14 million in sales. The college is averaging around 4,000 a year at this point, as well as the pastor school attracting thousands of people around the world. I do want to mention that these were statistics in 1998. So again, I feel like the influence that Jack Hyles and Hyles-Anderson College has had over the Independent Fundamental Baptist Church, and even just the Baptist Church in general, has been pretty significant. Our last video, as I mentioned earlier, talked about how Jack Hyles viewed women through his book, Woman the Completer. Now, if you watch that video, you know what I'm about to say. And his view is basically that women exist solely to serve men. He says that women do not have rights until they learn to read the Bible and be submissive. He says that women also need to learn to submit to their superiors. That is the literal word he uses, and that they are the inferiors and the weaker ones. And so they need to learn to be submissive, and then they'll be happy. Yeah, it was interesting, all right. Today's video, though, is going to be talking about how he views child rearing. These can be found in his two books, How to Rear Children and How to Rear Teenagers. Now, I wanted to point out that when I first started reading these two books, I was actually really surprised because I wasn't horrified by what I started out reading. The first few chapters actually, in my opinion, had really good advice about how you need to teach your children to be respectful. It talks about how to communicate with your children regularly and have a close relationship, but at the same time, as they get older, do not force them to talk to you and snoop through their belongings. He talks about how you should never scream at your children. It's just an inappropriate way to interact with them. He talks about how you need to instill good morals into your children, and that even if your child isn't a straight-A academic student, that doesn't make them a bad kid or mean that they're not smart. Both of these books start out with chapters along these lines about how you as a parent can do your part, and I have to admit, they're really good, and some of them are based in good, sound biblical principles. Fortunately, it did not stay this way. Sadly, both books devolved into advice that was genuinely so horrifying and horrendous that even if it was written 50 years ago, I don't think I can justify it as, well, he was just older or it was a different time period. It rather showcases a lot of the corruption and issues that surround the IFB movement. Alongside this information, I want viewers to be aware that while Jack Hyles was writing one of these books, and as they were continuing to be published over the years, his son, David Hyles, was allegedly committing horrific crimes within the churches, and Hyles was playing a part in covering it up. I don't want to get ahead of myself, though. We will look at this at the end of the video. My first major issue with the books, How to Rear Children, How to Rear Teenagers, was the horrific sexism, which should not be surprising to anyone who watched my Woman the Completer video. While to an extent, certain things could be considered Hyles just reflecting the time period he was in, you have to remember this book was written in the 70s. Hyles himself says that he knows he's going against the grain by some of the stuff he's writing. He believes that children should be forced by their parents to fit very, very specific gender roles, and some of it was kind of disheartening and even disturbing to read. He talks about how little girls need to do girl chores like cleaning the house, washing dishes, taking care of little children, and ironing, while boys need to do boy chores like chopping wood, gardening, or clean the garage. He believed very strongly that these two children should not exchange chores. So if you live in the city and you have no available boy chores like wood chopping, you need to invent some boy chores because you don't want your son to grow up and end up gay. Like, heaven forbid my son learns how to cook or vacuum. He also, in his own specific words, says that little girls doing girl chores will make them normal and pure. Besides this really odd sexist advice about chores, Hyles also believes little boys and little girls should not play with each other, or else they will end up homosexuals, especially boys. I don't even have words for this. Like, I think it's obvious how utterly ridiculous that kind of belief is. You're seriously telling me that small children who play together will end up gay and lesbian because they hung out with the same or the opposite sex? This comes to another thing that Hyles reiterates a lot in this book, and that is his obsession that your son will end up gay. You let him grow long hair as a baby, he'll end up gay. You let him play with girls, he'll end up gay. You don't let him do manly man, rough and tumble stuff, gay. It's just like, why? Why is this a thing that you're so obsessed with? About as consuming as his obsession that your son will end up gay is his obsession that a little girl needs to be trained to be a docile, submissive housewife someday. For example, you can let your daughter play sports, but make sure she's not too good at it, because if she does, it will be embarrassing to her future husband. He says that she needs to be smart enough to hold a conversation with a man. That way he feels like he has an intellectual listener and he feels gratified that he's being genuinely understood. But make sure, even if she is really smart, that he never feels like she's the smarter one. He needs to feel like he's smarter. An ideal example that he gave was a girl who knows about football because her husband likes it. She has a general idea of how the game is played, but honestly doesn't really know how to play it that well. So as they're sitting in the stands and she's interested because she knows little, he can explain the entire game to her. She's interested just enough to know that she likes what he likes, but she's dumb enough that he can explain how the game works to her and he can feel like a man. Some final thoughts on how he views women according to his child-rearing books can be seen here. Those women who fight for what they call equal rights are not beautiful women. The fact that a woman was made to be in submission to man is to her advantage. She gets to serve. Perhaps a man should be demonstrating for equal rights, for he does not have as lofty a position as the woman does. How dare women have fought for centuries for equal rights under the law, equal pay, and to be treated with love and respect, and to have rights over their own children. How dare women want the right to vote and own property and have a proper education so they're not forced to marry some old man. How dare a woman want to serve God for herself and have hobbies and a personality that are beyond her husband. How dare they? With this logic that Hyles is preaching, we should all wish we were slaves, because clearly slaves have the least amount of rights, so that must be the most glorified position. From my understanding, the passages where Christ talks about leaders or servants is supposed to be directed at leaders, telling them how they need to do more to serve others, as well as to comfort people who are servants, and to tell them that there's hope, and that just because in this life they have a position where they might not have as much as they would like, God still values them. But if you look at ancient Christianity, they fought for the rights of other people because they knew that just because God is offering comfort when you don't have rights doesn't mean that you shouldn't have them, period. Another major theme that can be seen throughout this book is the utter need to adore and devote yourself to the church and pastor. Now, full disclaimer, I am a preacher's daughter. I go to church, I'm a devoted Christian, or at least I try to be a devoted Christian and do what's right. I am not saying you should not take your kids to church or teach them how to be Christians or raise them in your religion. I plan, when I have my own children, to raise them within my church and my religion. That's a natural and healthy thing to do. But the way Hyles showcases church and devotion to pastor and how you need to rear your children really shows the unhealthy way that independent fundamental Baptists view church and their pastors. He believes that your children need to be in church every single time there's an opportunity. Teenagers should go to 3 services a week. They need to go to soul winning. They need to go to church choir. They need to go to church youth activities and church events. They should go to the Christian school if there's a Christian school. He says at one point that if you let your children go to secular activities as opposed to letting them go to youth group, then your kid going to grow up to be a bum, and they're going to leave their religion, which also makes them a bum, according to him. He believes this so strongly that he thinks that when you are pregnant, if you skip church because you're not feeling well, your kid will be a bum. Or if you don't bring your infant baby to church, soon as that baby is popped out, like next Sunday or the second Sunday, bum. He also believes in children having a great respect for their elders. I completely agree with this. You should teach your children how to be respectful to adults and their teachers and pastors. I believe filial piety is one of the most important virtues that a person in society can have. But the extent to which he takes it is very unhealthy. Hyles suggests that you as a parent should never criticize any authority ever, especially in front of your children. While I do not believe you should be nitpicking, there needs to come a point where you're willing to stand for what's right and stand up for your child as opposed to just who's in charge. Hyles believes that if there's an argument between a teacher and a child, or a pastor and a child, or the youth director and a child, always side with the adult. Always, no matter what. And that's just not right. Sometimes the adult is wrong in the situation, and you need to defend your child and show them that doing the right thing is more important than sticking with whoever's in charge. He says, though, that if you do this, your children will end up in a dire situation one day, and they'll need that person you criticized, and then they won't trust them. He gives an example of a girl saying she ended up in a situation like this, and I kid you not, he said he was the only one who could help this girl. And he also put, it was generally agreed. Like, I'm not saying that. I'm the only one who can help her. Other people are saying that. But the poor thing wouldn't go to him because, her parents criticized his tie. Like, what the heck? That's like a comedy, literal comedy levels right there. Like, that is literal comedy at that point. Like, I can't take that seriously. Speaking of which, House seems to think that the preacher should be very elevated in the child's life. He believes, for example, that it is completely inappropriate for there to be any sex education in schools. But that alongside the doctor and parent, it is okay for the pastor to be involved in the sex education at times. He talks about a time when a child called him by his first name, which, okay, I will say that is a bit rude. But his response was to grip that young child by the collar, yank him up to his face, and say, "What did you just call me?" And then the child was like freaked out, obviously, and called him by the proper name. He's like, "I'm not arrogant or prideful. I don't deserve anything. It's just that my title, the title of the church, deserves respect." Yeah, sure, whatever you want to say, Jack. Final nail in the coffin, though, is when Hyles is telling stories about parents who properly raised their children to respect the pastor. And an example he gives is a little boy who calls him God. He'll call him Brother God, or when Hyles would preach a sermon very emotionally, he would say, "Wow, God sure is angry today." Hyles' response is to tell the reader, some parents have been on the job, haven't they? Should we not remember in the Bible when the apostles themselves were being bowed down to and people were going to sacrifice to them, and they rebuked those people, telling them that they were equals and that they were not gods? Yet here you are bragging on these parents and saying the parent is raising their child properly because children are calling him God. And of course, no IFB child reading book will be complete without a few chapters dedicating to spanking your children. Now, I know there are a lot of different views about spankings. I know it's very controversial. I have my own personal views. But regardless of what your views are on spanking, the way Hyles talks about it is undeniably wrong and just despicable. He claims that if you don't spank your children, they'll end up growing up to be murderers, criminals, no good people who put their family in a nursing home. Hyles says that when you spank a child, you should tell them that you're only doing it because God commanded them to, and that if they don't spank that kid, they're going to be a sinner, and that God's going to judge them. The irony is that the verse Hyles used to justify this is, "Like as a father pitieth his child, so the Lord pitieth them that fear him." Really? Really? A quote from Hyles is, "Let the child realize that if you as a parent do not punish him properly, you are being disobedient to God and committing the same sin the child is committing. Explain to him that you are a child of God, and if you refuse to obey God in the execution of his judgment upon your children, God will pour out his wrath upon you." That's totally not going to build up any fear and resentment of God in your child. Totally not going to do that. Hyles believes so. This part of the video, major trigger warning for child abuse. But Hyles then goes on to say that he believes not only should you spank your children, but you should spank infants. He believes you should spank babies as soon as they can walk, at least. Let me repeat, at least. He also believes that you should spank your child on purpose to the point where you leave marks and bruises on them. This physically disgusted me, and when I read it, I thought it was just pure, unadulterated evil. He goes on to claim that this sick, twisted doctrine of spanking until your child is covered in marks is in the Bible, because Proverbs 20:30 says, "The blueness of a wound cleanseth away evil, so do stripes the inward parts of the belly." He claims so heavily that you need to do this, that if you don't, you are rebelling against God as a parent. And I feel like I need to clarify this. First of all, this passage has nothing to do with spanking. It's talking about in general in life, when you do things that leave a physical mark on you. Yeah, you're probably not going to do it again. You put your hand on a stove and it burns, probably not going to do it again. It is in no way instructing you as an authority figure to leave marks on somebody. If anything, we as authority figures should be doing things to try to prevent them from ending up in situations like that. Hyles goes on, though, to say, God knows best, so you need to ignore your feelings inside that tell you that this is wrong. Because, yeah, he says you're going to feel like this is wrong, but that this is what God commands. He says that the word nurture in Ephesians 6:4, where it talks about how parents need to nurture their children in the admonition of the Lord, is the same word used in the Bible when it says Christ was beaten with a cat of nine tails, which is not true. The word is paideia, which translates to chastening or to purify. It is a Greek word associated with education and refers to the sophisticated classical system of education used by fathers for their sons. The law practically required this. Such children were also not beaten, as being beaten in Greek culture was something that you did to your slave, not your son. Rather, children were educated. Chasten also means to purify. Obviously, if you're raising your children, you want to help purify them of selfishness. You want to raise them properly. And again, even if you do believe in spanking your child occasionally, there is no excuse for beating your child to the point of leaving physical marks on them. Rather, the word referring to the cat of nine tails is mastigo, and is in a completely separate verse than the verse Hyles quoted. I've done a separate video on this on my TikTok, but just to shorten things, this is not at all what the Bible is talking about, and the fact that he would just twist and manipulate scripture like this to try to justify beating your child is horrifying. Hyles quotes, "The wise and spiritual parent obeys God and follows his commandments, not his own reason." Now, why exactly do I need to do these things? Why does Hyles think I need to enforce strict gender roles and segregation, spank my children to the point where it physically shows on their body, never defend my child against authority or criticize bad authority? Well, Hyles insists again and again, if you follow these rules, your kids will be well-adjusted, holy God-fearing citizens. But if you don't, they will become rioters, murderers, parent abusers, and criminals. I'm not exaggerating. Some of those words are like the exact words he uses when he says what will happen if you don't do certain instructions in this book. Over and over again, Hyles says that if you follow this advice, you're basically guaranteed righteous children. And he points to and brags constantly about his own children and how righteous they are, especially his son, David Hyles. He talks just over and over about how great his son was, about how his son's a preacher, how close they were to each other. Hyles wrote poems to his son. And though the words are never specifically said, he's practically used as like the pinnacle of what your child will end up like if you follow this advice. And I don't think this video would be complete if we did not go over the alleged horrifying crimes of David Hyles. A timeline of this can be seen on the Preacher Boys podcast article, which I have linked below for you to check out. Here we'll discuss how in the 1970s, David Hyles essayed a teenage girl whose father was high up in the church. This is the same 1970s era in which Jack Hyles was writing his book, How to Rear Teenagers. In the 1980s, while Jack Hyles was still continuing to allow these books to be published, David Hyles divorced his wife after being found committing adultery with Brenda Stevens. Allegedly, he was moved to another church by Jack Hyles because those who were on the church board were insisting that he be moved, but this was not something that Hyles allegedly wanted to do. While there, the following events were noted to have happened, which can be read in the Chicago Tribune, which again I will link below. In 1985, Stevens' 15-month-old son Brent was found lifeless in his crib. The autopsy revealed trauma and numerous broken bones in various stages of healing. The Illinois Department of Children and Family Services investigated, but the cause of death could not be determined. At a grand jury inquest, David Hyles exercised his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Stevens didn't show. The case remains unsolved. Paul Sciolino, a former DCFS investigator now in private practice, says he's still pursuing leads. For more information on this, I recommend reading the book Schizophrenic Christianity by Jeri Massi. But it is heavily believed that David Hyles is responsible for the death of his stepson, who was, I will remind you, barely over a year old when he passed away. I'm going to end this video with a quote that appears in Jack Hyles' book, How to Rear Teenagers. And I will encourage you to judge Hyles by his own standards. Hyles says, Dr. Harvey Springer, a well-known evangelist who is now in heaven, used to say to preachers, "Don't tell me how many you had in Sunday school. Let me see your kids." I think he had the right idea. So just think about that. A pastor who had the world's largest Sunday school and the alleged crimes his son has committed. And allegedly, Hyles was aware of every single one of these crimes and allowed them to be covered up or hidden. All of the books continue to be written and published and praising the virtues of his children, especially David Hyles. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming to my channel and watching my video. I hope it was helpful to you in some way. Today was a hard video to make. I don't think I'll be doing a lot of chattering videos from the IFB. I may do more in the future. There is another book I might possibly want to go over. I do find it a lot more difficult, though, to talk about these topics just because I find it so horribly disgusting that anyone would treat their child this way. Again, though, I thank you for watching, and I hope that this can spread awareness as to why there might be certain issues in the IFB. If you enjoyed the video and want to learn more, I recommend that you please subscribe and like the video, and hopefully I'll get to see you guys soon. Bye.